Just give a few moments for people to get settled in here before we start. Make sure audio is worked out and you can hear everything. Okay, and I'll make sure that this is all typed out so people coming in later that can't hear me now are able to still see it as we go forward. But welcome to today's webinar. Before we get started, I just wanted to cover a quick note about this platform. This is Zoom webinar, not Zoom meeting. So you don't have to worry about interrupting us. You can't be heard or seen unless I specifically allow you to be. So the ways to interact, which Wendy will go over, are in your Zoom dashboard, the Q&A and the chat function. Note about the chat, if you did want to talk with other people, other attendees, make sure that you select all panelists and attendees from the chat window. Otherwise, only the panelists ourselves will see it. So without further ado, I want to hand it off to Wendy Kilgore.
Thank you, Mike. Good morning or good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for Meeting the Moment, Transformations in the Digital Credential Space as our webinar today. We'll cover lots of things about what's going on and what folks are using for digital credentials. And we have several panelists with us today as well. And would like to touch base on a bit of housekeeping first. As Mike said, participants will be muted unless we unmute you. If you have questions, please post them in the Q&A tab. We will get to most of them towards the end at about the 45-minute mark. And it's going to be recorded, as he also said. The link to the report actually won't be released for another week, and our website is currently down at the moment. So we will send the link to the ACRO research page to you where you can sign up. If you don't already have not already signed up for that, you will automatically get the research report if you sign up there. Otherwise, it will be on the website in a week. And I like to add the last one there, dog guest speaker appearances may occur unannounced. Thank you for understanding. She is off in another room, like 2 doors away, but she sometimes has a loud bark if FedEx shows up to the door, which, so please pardon in advance any dog guest speakers that come up on us. Big team today, and I'm going to serve. I'm Wendy Kilgore, the Director of Research at ACRO. For those of you who are online today who participated in the survey, thank you very much. I can't do my work and do this kind of webinars without your participation, but I'll be moderating and presenting a little bit. And we also have Mary Strain from Highland as well, Strategic Alliances. She's going to moderate and present. If you want to wave over there, Mary, you can see her name there. And we have Sue from San Diego State University, one of our panelists and experts in some digital credentials, waving as well. Dr. Cameron McCoy is joined us as well from Lehigh University, and Dr. James Feigert. I'm sorry, James, I forgot to ask you how to pronounce your last name. So if you want to correct me if I said that wrong. I nailed it? Oh, good.
Yeah, you got it.
Thank you all for joining us. And they may be turning their cameras off until they're going to be talking a little later, or they may stay up there and join us depending on what they'd like to do personally. But again, our team members are here to address any questions you had today and share their expertise. Like a lot of research with ACRO, we actually partner with a lot of folks to get the information out to you. And today, our research was sponsored in webinar in part by Highland. And Mary and her team contributed to us and our ability to send out the survey to you and to produce this webinar. And we'll also produce a slightly different set of information during the ACRO conference for talking a little bit more about future state with regards to digital credentials, and they are made that also possible. So thank you, Highland. So to start, I'm going to put a little definition around digital credentials. It just provides proof of competence and training and qualification tied to a singular person. And it can be any form. It can be a transcript, it can be a badge, it can be any number of things, but that relay the information that's proof of a credential or education earned. And typically in higher education, they actually fall into a few categories at this point in time. And electronic data exchange is, so a lot of folks know that, is how transcripts are shared between some institutions right now. EDX covers a lot of sharing types of information, not as EDI and JSON and other things that are a little over my head. And Sue, one of our experts, will be talking to you about that, as will Jim and Cameron. We also have micro-credentials and digital badging that some of you may take advantage of right now. Those are for specific skills and competencies, typically an image file pointing to hosted data. We also have the new kid on the block, so to speak, no pun intended, is a blockchain, which Mary will speak to in more detail about it, as will Cameron. Is a natively digital document, digitally signed, that leverages the blockchain technology as a secure anchor of trust for verification. And that's really pretty much all I know about blockchain at this point in time. So we are definitely here to talk a little bit more about that solution, because it's not been around for very long, where EDX has been around for a few decades and micro-credentials, a few years now. We've also included number 4, that a little asterisk off to the side, though, a digitally signed PDFs, because that's really prevalent right now for folks to use digitally signed PDFs to share transcripts, but they're not technically a digital credential because they have the perception in higher education among many to be a digital credential. We have put them here, but it's really just an image document that is transmitted electronically, but it can't be modified or changed unless it's reissued, so it has to be redone. But it is predominant in the landscape at the moment, so we are talking about it a bit. From the survey data, we have current state information. We have about a third who are trying to increase resources. So the pandemic forced a lot of folks to make some changes fairly quickly, and they're planning on contributing additional resources at the college level to provide additional formats of digital credentials. Right now, 89%, so almost all of you, are reporting that you issue one or more type of digital credentials of the type mentioned on the page before. The PDF transcripts, though, as I mentioned, they kind of dominate the landscape, and I'll show you in the next slide what I mean by that. But we also have 88% who think that, or almost all of you, believe that it helps supports efficiency goals. That's ideal, is that a credential actually of this type will help you do your work easier and have students have access to it. But over half have a concern about the security and safety of those credentials. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. Some of our folks will mention their experience with that and what they have done to address their institutional concerns about credential fraud, and perhaps what technology also addresses it a little bit better. Although a third see micro-credentials as having great promise, half even of those who don't use it currently don't see them as part of the official academic record. So they're just kind of this add-on piece at the moment. There's not a great high-level detail of adoption, but they have added them on and see them as an addition to, but not official. And about half didn't have or fall into my category. No familiarity with blockchain technology and how it can be used in higher education. Some of you may be aware that ACE has actually just awarded some institutions some money to use blockchain technology. And so it's gaining some traction out there in terms of familiarity. And the Department of Education has actually put out some information in the last year, some videos and some training documents about how blockchain can be used in education. So it's starting to get a little bit of traction. We asked folks, what current digital credentials do they use? And as you can see, digitally signed inbound and outbound transcripts are the predominant mode. And ACRO has done this kind of research off and on for years now, like asking people how they're sharing transcripts. This data hasn't changed particularly much. Both the PDF and the EDX, they vary maybe 5 to 8% up and down, depending on who is in the survey sample about who is using what. We actually have institutions who have given up EDX, a few, have reported giving up EDX and going to only PDF for inbound and outbound transcripts. Pluses and minuses for all of these various solutions. And again, our experts will talk about those. But as you can see, they sort of trail off here with very few people using a combined learner and employment record as a digital credential. And we have 4% in this sample who reported using blockchain already. we have the goals. We ask them to say, what were you trying to do when you adopt these digital credentials? Efficiency, of course, so it makes it easier for us to get information back and forth to students and other stakeholders. Fraud protection to address that concern. Mobility, it helps students move from one place to the other, maybe employment-wise or educational institution or both, if these digital credentials are readily available to them, especially right now when there's still some folks who aren't necessarily working from campus and producing this information on hard copy. Cost reduction, that is this, a lot of them commented about they adopted digital credentials to save money. And for the most part, they actually do, because you don't have the postage and the paper and all those other kind of things to manage and manipulate when you are releasing digital credentials. But we also have this component of equity. So students, the institutions think that there's a little bit more balance of equity around student access when you provide digital credentials, perhaps because there isn't a cost for them anymore, or there's a reduced cost and access is easier. So for students which maybe the cost of the transcripts and other digital credentials might have been a barrier for how many they ordered and used for themselves, the idea that digital credentials can address equity from perhaps that standpoint and others is also an aspect of why institutions are adopting them. I just briefly summarized some very quick highlights from the survey. The report is actually a few dozen pages long. There's a lot more detail in the report when it comes out in a couple weeks. But I wanted to spend most of the webinar today listening to our experts and having them share their cases, studies with you about what they've done with the particular digital credentials that we have on board here. But the report will be available and you can dive into deeper information. And as usual with the reports, if there's something you want to see more of or a little bit of a deeper dive into, you can always email me directly and I can take that data and slice it and dice it for you if you'd like that. So without further ado, we're going to introduce Sue Reyes, and she is going to talk to you today about her experience with electronic data exchange. Sue, take it away.
Good morning. Yes, good morning or afternoon, wherever you are. And I want to say up front, if you hear a little whining, one of my furry little friends is upset he's been locked out of mom's office. So hopefully he won't be too loud. But, I'm Sue Reyes. I'm an analyst programmer at San Diego State University, and I have been there for 18 plus years. And I've also been a member of ACRO's Speedy Committee for the past 9 years. I have worked mainly with enrollment services, doing IT work for them, and I started out helping to automate the admissions application years ago and the processing of that, and then moved from there into transcripts. When we're talking about EDX in higher education, the usual conversation starts out with transcripts. And transcripts can be sent electronically through PDF, which is a picture, but it's still transmitted electronically. So the delivery is faster. But it could also be EDI, which is electronic data interchange, or XML, or any type of custom file that you're transmitting from one institution to another. A lot of times a comma separated or CSV file can be used or is used to transmit some of this data. And then newer technologies such as JSON or blockchain are coming up into the world of our electronic data interchange. San Diego State has actually participated in EDI for a number of years. In fact, they started EDI before I started working there. Around 1998 or 99, they decided that they should receive electronic transcripts from their closest feeder colleges. So the 3 San Diego community college systems worked with San Diego State to format their transcripts into EDI, the TS-130 transaction set 130. And they used to put them onto disks. And someone from each of those community colleges would drive those disks over to San Diego State, have coffee with the admissions people or whoever was, their point of contact, and make a morning of it, and then drive back to their campus. And that went on for many years. around that time, I actually worked for Home Depot, and I started doing EDI at Home Depot with invoices and financial data and inventory. So when I came to San Diego State in 2002, I was a natural fit to take over working with their EDI transcripts. So we slowly brought about some changes of, okay, let's not drive disks over. Let's save on the gas and money and time and actually transmit them. So originally we transmitted direct from those 3 colleges, community college systems. And then we joined the Speedy server. And so we've for years been getting transcripts from the Speedy server. We started with those 3 feeder districts, but around 2008, when the economy was really bad, we started losing people to retirements or finding other jobs. And because the economy was not doing well, we were not allowed to replace those people. So we found ourselves in a situation where it was taking 8 weeks or more to process the transcripts that were coming in. We just didn't have the staff. We didn't have the resources to deal with all of those transcripts that were coming in. So that's when they brought me out of the IT department. And I did actually work in a basement in the IT. And they brought me up into enrollment services and had me start looking at what technology we had available and how can we make the transcript processing more efficient. So we pushed EDI and we began looking at feeder schools based on the volume that they sent to us and working with them and really just trying to show the community colleges the benefit of doing EDI with San Diego State, the fact that we could process a transcript overnight as opposed to it being processed 8 weeks after it was delivered to our campus. And providing that service for students was a very big selling point to get transcripts going, coming to us EDI. When I first started working on this project, we were receiving somewhere between 35,000 and 40,000 applications for admission each year during our filing period. And the transcripts that were coming in, it was 2 to 3 times that number usually. So now, the last several years, we've received well over 90,000 applications for admission. And the number of transcripts has skyrocketed to join that. So at this point in time, if we were not EDI, we could not handle our volume in a timely manner and make decision applications. So in addition to just receiving the EDI, we've learned that we have to start processing them more efficiently and getting them into workflows. We've gone from 3 feeder schools to well over 130 EDI partners who send us transcripts. We use our Highland on-base system to take those transcripts, and once they've loaded to Highland and to our student information system, we then process them using workflows so that we can route the transcripts to the people that need to see them in the fastest way possible. So, excuse me, for the last 4 years, over 87% of our incoming college transcripts have been EDI. They all go into the student imaging system and to the archival system. They are workflowed. And we discovered a few years ago that we needed to not just have those go into the systems and be auto matriculated, but we also needed to look at certain things like the degree segments and the field of study. And so we now are using those fields to do things like identify students whose transcripts have a California for transfer degree that need to take special routing and have special reviews. So we've processed in the past year well over 40,000 transcripts through EDI and through our imaging and student information systems. In most cases, the transcripts are processed within a day of being received, and the student can see an unofficial matriculation if they're trying to transfer to our institution. One of the biggest issues with EDX is you do need a technical resource. to help you. But once you've set up the initial mapping of the data to or from your student information system, the process tends to run on its own, and you only need a technical person every now and then. If there's a problem with the network or with a transmission, you might need to get your IT people involved. But I do support the process, but I don't touch the process very often anymore. All of our functional staff receive all of the transcripts, process the transcripts, and know who to contact if there is a problem with the transcripts. Sorry. It really is a very smooth system, and we've learned that we don't touch every transcript coming in anymore. We really only touch the exceptions or the transcripts that have special data that need special processing and handling.
Well, thank you, Sue. But what I'm taking away from you is you basically could not currently handle the incoming volume of transcripts if it weren't for this type of technology or something similar. If it was still coming in on paper, you weren't going to be able to handle the volume coming in. And it has streamlined your processes, and it's automated, and you only have to touch the exception. So what I'm taking away from that is that you would recommend this kind of solution or something else that puts your institution in that place. So
absolutely,
especially with that volume. And so thank you very much. Appreciate you. And Jim, you're going to talk about digital PDFs, and hope to hear about how you're working with those and the uses, successes, challenges, and recommendations. So take it away.
Thank you, Wendy, and good morning, afternoon, everybody. I am Jim Feigert. I'm the registrar at Saddleback College. It's one of the 115 California community colleges. We're located in Orange County in Mission Viejo, California. In my previous life, for the 10 years before here, I was an assistant registrar at the University of Southern California, and that's where I sort of grew into the PDF transcript world. So I can sort of share, cross both bridges, the experiences at both institutions. My experience here at Saddleback, I think, is interesting in that as a registrar, I'm also the director of admissions. So I see both the incoming and outgoing side of all the transcripts in our office, and my perspective is a little bit different than a typical registrar where we just handle sending. But just some numbers to give everyone an idea. We're student population about 26,000 students right now. Our enrollment is a little bit down over the last year due to COVID, but we send over the last year, we've sent over almost 37,000 transcripts. And 84% of those were in some form of electronic delivery. So very, very few paper transcripts anymore. That is way up from the 77% from the year before. So we are definitely seeing an increase in electronic delivery. Of those electronic transcripts, we are at about 75% of those are still PDFs. So there's still other EDX formats that we're sending out, mostly XML. We don't work a lot with EDI at our school, but we are certainly willing and able to accommodate whatever needs to be done. And I think what it's been alluded to already by what Wendy talked about. PDFs are kind of the first logical step to dip your toe, if you will, into the digital credential world. We've been using them for several years here. We started with them at USC in 2009. When people were starting to look for them. We didn't even advertise that they were going to be available, PDF transcripts. We released their access literally on graduation day in 2009, and without any advertisement or any sort of notification, we saw the requests for orders start to come in right away. So even back then, they were something that was called for. I think what the most useful thing about the PDF is its portability. It is an image, so it can be on any type of device. It can be housed there, and it can be moved. You can keep it in a Dropbox folder. You can keep it with the proper security certification. It can be posted to a LinkedIn if you wanted it there. It can be shared quite easily. It's very, very transportable. It can be sent internationally very easily. At USC, we had a tremendous population of international students, so the PDF transcript was very, very useful for that. We here at Saddleback, we find that we have a lot of local local folks, employers, people looking to verify a credential, looking to do it quickly, and the PDF is very useful for them, particularly because it is easy, it's understandable. You don't need any special technology. You need some way to be able to read a PDF, and in terms of creating it, you just need to be able to print PostScript and have that attached to a file. To add the security, there's a little bit more technology involved with that. The vendors, the transcript vendors that are out there do that very cheaply and very successfully. And to me, that's what sort of makes it the most portable and understandable of the formats. Everyone can receive a PDF, everyone can read a PDF, everyone can open a PDF and understand what it is. It looks like the image of the traditional transcript that everyone is used to. And I think that's why folks are still very, very, very comfortable with it. They are ordered and delivered in moments, from the time a student starts a PDF order till the time it's received at the destination. It's just a matter of minutes, and it's there. Depending on what the imaging software that the receiving party has, it can be imaged very quickly and very easily. It can be mapped to by many fields relatively quickly. So it's super simple to understand. It's easy to add the security to it, whether you're using a vendor or whether you're doing it yourself. There are some schools that create and secure their own PDFs, which is excellent. But it's cheap, it's easy, it's fast, and it's easily understood. Some of the things to keep in mind in terms of challenges that we've seen and continue to see, although less so as the technology becomes more and more understood. Early on was with firewalls. There are a lot of places, because the PDFs are certified and digitally signed, sometimes they have trouble getting through firewalls. Still, we see that with some of the military, either the institutions themselves or military bases, being able to validate that PDF because of the firewall sometimes is a little bit tricky. I mentioned before international students receiving them. There are still some countries and some places that have some firewall protections in their own state or national internets, and sometimes the security becomes a little bit hard to validate. That's more and more uncommon, but still happens from time to time. Sometimes institutions, particularly early on when they first adopt PDF, they decide they want to get every single bell and whistle and every possible security lockdown that they can possibly think of, whether they want to make it not printable or they want to have it expire or they want to be able to recall it. All of these things, which are great security tools, and they are very, very helpful in a lot of ways, but they also can present some challenges on the receiving side. It sometimes makes that document not shareable. So those are all things to keep in mind. OCR is still an issue sometimes because it is still a digital image, and that data, when it's received, the receiving institution or recipient still has to do something with it. What we're still seeing a lot of schools have to do is they receive this PDF, they then have to print it out and then scan it to image it to their imaging software. Terribly inefficient. We ourselves have to do that in some cases here at Saddleback. Not too many times. Our imaging software is very, very robust and pretty good, but what we're not able to do very well is OCR on those PDFs. So unless you have really, really good folks that who do OCR or really good OCR software, a real clear-cut PDF to OCR into your imaging system or into your student information system, even more importantly, that can still be a challenge. So those are some of the things to keep in mind. Things that I recommend, I think, be flexible with the security you want to include. There's really very little reason to say that a PDF can't be printed or shouldn't be printable. It's very easy to say if it's printed, it's going to print with a watermark, and the watermark can say printed, or it can say unofficial once printed, those kinds of things. That makes it a useful document. Be flexible in terms of not limiting yourself to it's only being a PDF. You can incorporate data. You can embed XML into your PDF. So this makes that document far more useful once it's received. Imagine the world where you receive a PDF, it's got XML data embedded in it, and some of that XML data could be, you click here to pull up the syllabus from the class that you're looking at the grade for, or it's the catalog from the institution, or it has the general education requirements, those types of things. Those can all be part of the PDF. They're not unique documents in that it's only a PDF or data now. There are some schools doing tremendously robust things with that. If you take a look at what Stanford's done, what Johns Hopkins is doing, and a number of other institutions are embedding XML into their PDFs, and it's really, really exciting stuff. Don't limit yourself to it's just being a transcript. You can send a PDF verification of enrollment, verification of degree. We did that at USC, and it was tremendously successful. In fact, we by the time I was leaving there, we were sending as many PDF verifications as we were PDF transcripts. A lot of times the student doesn't want to send their entire academic history. They just want to show, hey, I graduated, and they don't want to necessarily go through a third party for that. So you can do that yourself. Make it a verification document that gets sent out. It can be recommendation letters. You can have anything be sent as a secure, validated PDF with security. Makes it very portable. Makes it easy to read, understand, and accept. And I think, you know, the more flexible that you're willing to be, and this will include the comprehensive learner record. These are going to be, you know, some of your non-academic transcripts, maybe your student affairs transcripts, some of your experiential things. These lend themselves very well to being sent as PDFs as part of the student portfolio, the student transcript record. There's really no limitation because it is an image, because it is something that we already are able to visualize and create and turn into a digital format that can be sent. It's a tremendously useful document, and as I mentioned, our numbers from this past year, those are all significantly up from the year before. Obviously, being not in our office because of the pandemic, I'm the only person in my office today, and I'm only here once a week. So you can imagine we wouldn't be able to process 36,000 transcripts in a year with one person in the office once a week. But because we're doing so many PDFs and EDX in general, it becomes almost seamless. The students have not noticed any slowdown or dip in the sending and receiving of transcripts. So that's what I have to say about PDFs, and I look forward to potentially answering some more questions for everyone later.
Thank you, Jim. Again, appreciate your insights into PDFs, and that you also mentioned that you're using EDX as well. So wanted to take a step back and recognize that our experts have a lot to say here, and we may actually shorten the Q&A time because I want to give Cameron and Mary also sufficient time to talk here today. If we get to that point where we don't have enough time to answer all of your questions in this webinar, they will be captured and we will address them via email and other things with you. But Jim, what I also heard was you used some language OCR, so optical character recognition. I want to make sure I have that out there for the folks, and that challenge is somewhat from the intake, and we learned that in the survey. A lot of folks responded that they didn't know that they could make the PDFs machine readable. And we had a definition of what machine readable is, and that is that it converts it to a format where it loads automatically into your SIS, and then you can make admissions decisions off that perhaps, and transfer equivalency decisions. And it sees it's more like a true data exchange, like an EDX. But very few institutions, a very small number of institutions who have inbound PDFs have implemented that part of it. And so that puts some limitations around it, whereas Jim talked about it, sometimes they have to print it out, or even if you convert it, you just see it as an image, you're still manually data entering some of this information that if it were a true data exchange would be automated by your SIS system, and there'd be very, very hands-off. So a lot of advantages for outbound, quick implementation and those things, and some challenges around the true automation of the data to data. So thank you very much, Jim. And again, if we don't have enough time towards the end to answer all the questions, we will address them. We'll capture that Q&A and address them via email and other resources. I'm going to hand it off to Cameron now, who's going to address the new kid in the block, blockchain.
Well, thank you, Wendy, and thanks for having me. And thanks to our two previous presenters, because what I get to say now is simply that all the great things about EDX and all the great things about the PDF side of this, you can do with the blockchain. And all the challenges that you see or that they discussed and offered tend to go away when you use the blockchain. So let me just back up for a second here and explain what we're talking about with blockchain, because I know it's really challenging for folks to get their heads around it, particularly when you start thinking about cryptocurrency and get confused about what's happening in that space. And so Mary can jump in here, but the easiest way I think for people to understand the the blockchain is that if we had a sentence and we spread it in an Excel spreadsheet and it said, Cameron went to the store, and we took each one of those words and put them in a different cell and then moved them into a different row, right? So now I divided up, and then we took those cells and we scattered them across the ether. And we said, Cameron, you have one key to this, and Lehigh University, you have the other key to this. And only when you allow for that sentence to be you both allow for that sentence to be put back together, can it be put back together. But all of the data are still there, right? And they've just been spread across the proverbial blocks and then chained together. And that's the same kind of thing that happens here when we're thinking about recognizing learning using the blockchain. So at its core, when we think about the existing tools that are available, I think one of the challenges we have to ask ourselves, and I'm going to put this challenge on you guys as an organization, and as you folks that are registrars, and even our friends at the National Student Clearinghouse to really get their heads around this, we have to be in a place in today's environment where we're centering equity, we're centering learners, and we're centering trust. And so when I go back to your list that you offered earlier here, Wendy, we had efficiency was the #1 reason to go to digital credentials, then fraud, then mobility, then cost reduction, and then equity. And my challenge to you folks is, sure, let's think about how we can find some efficiencies in the work that you're doing. And yes, let's recognize that 80% of people lie on their LinkedIn profile, and we've got to find a way around that and verify and validate credentials. But let's take those last 3 and be really thoughtful about how we might flip them over so that equity is first. Because student mobility matters, right? And everything that we talked about with EDX, with it being activation of credentials, being an efficient way to move learner recognized credentials from one institution to another. Those are things that are barriers to entry for a lot of folks, and that you can do with the blockchain as well, right? And those challenges that we find around mobility, those sort of start to go away, right? Cost reduction, because we're more efficient and things are machine readable. Can't, as we've heard from Jim, those are a challenge to do with the PDF environment. Sure, you can go to OCR, but the native nature of a blockchain anchored document is that it is a JSON file. So not only is it an open standard, but it's machine readable automatically. So when we think about the blockchain, I'll give you sort of the 7 things that are really valuable about it that aren't necessarily available in all of the others collectively, right? Human readable. You got that in the PDF, and Jim talked about that, right? I think about the story of the guy who designed a horse to put on the front of a car in the 1890s so that people would be more comfortable riding in a car. Okay, well, we're in a space where we recognize a visual document, but I can tell you that my degrees are sitting in this corner here on the floor, and nobody ever asks me for them. So we ought to be thinking about how do we get to a place where those are activatable? And Jim talked a lot about that. Well, you can do that with the blockchain, certainly. You certainly can do that with digital signatures and the PDF document and paper documents. Machine readable, that's where the efficiency comes in. And we talked about this for EDX, right? You can do that with the blockchain, and you could do exactly what's happening at San Diego State. And I would be willing to bet in about 3 weeks, they're using an API to issue to the blockchain and continuing with their EDX platform. Check, right? Because it's machine readable. Same thing with the digital signature. Now you're starting to verify, but as Jim pointed out, the PDF is a little challenging around the machine readability part. Now, cryptographically owned. Okay, who owns it? Well, you heard me describe the blockchain as I own a key and the institution owns a key. It's the same thing with issuing to the blockchain, whether it's a diploma or a transcript or some format of a credential that is outside of our traditional registrar or academic pathway, right? But I own it. It belongs to me as a learner. And so I have self-sovereign identity, and it's cryptographically proven, right? I can't, it's tamper evident, it's immutable. So add tamper evident to your list. Decentralized verification. Now, in today's world, I have to send you my PDF, or I have to send you a copy of my document. Or if I want to go get my transcript from Washington State, I get to go pay $15, and Washington State gets $5 of those dollars and somebody else keeps the other 10. and you send me something that lasts me for 2 or 3 years, and then I can share my document that way, or I can print it out and then scan it in, and we've sort of defeated the purpose at the end of the day. In a blockchain space, I own it, and I can stack my credentials however I want to and share whatever pieces of those I would like to with an employer or an institution or anybody who's trying to verify my DD-214 from the military and validate it, or whatever the document might be, can be done with the blockchain. The other piece of this that's really sort of important is that it's independently timestamped, right? So you know when it was issued, and it was stamped by somebody who isn't either one of us, right? So it's in the chain, and maybe I'm messing that one up, but technically it's a simple solution. So at the end of the day, I think one of our challenges around blockchain is that people get really confused about what it is and that whole thing of the blockchain, but really it's a simple technology that already exists and actually has existed since the 1970s. We're just getting to the place where we're starting to use it in a wise way. And for learner credentials, that's where we want to go. So at Lehigh, what we've done is we've said, okay, we're not ready yet to issue the degree or the diploma, even though I have template copies of it sitting on my phone right now, into the blockchain and allow for folks to do it that way. But what we could do is say, learners learn things in the residential environment and the experiential environment. Let's understand what that framework is for a career-ready ecosystem to best align admissions through the extension of the Lehigh experience, and figure out how we move Lehigh from a process-oriented institution with all the barriers to entry and barriers to exit, and get to a place where it's a platform entity where we're anchoring learners to us. And so when we went to go do this, we started to issue these credentials in with a very thoughtful framework to recognize learner outcomes, and then issue the credential to the blockchain. So all of my students who are student athletes at Lehigh now have earned a leadership block cert. So they've received this block cert, sits on their phone, and when they go and talk to an employer, that distinctive experience is now verifiable and validatable, and we can stack it. So they can have a leadership 1 to a leadership 5, or whatever the case may be, as we're trying to be distinctive as an institution. And the other really important piece of that is that once they've left the university, we'll know that there's some activity happening that they're verifying in a way that we don't today, right? So if I start to see them verifying their credentials, I'm able to say, hey, Sally, I noticed you're verifying your credentials a lot. Is there something that we can do to help you? How might we continue to serve you as an institution, right? So now we're thinking about how do we really stretch this out and have the technology that lets us recognize learning where and when it occurs, and modularize our academic pathways, and use technology to fight these challenges of fraud and mobility, equity, cost reduction, and efficiency, right? And I don't want to understate this enough. The equity piece here is essential, because all of these platforms don't mean anything if we're not giving learners agency over their credentials. And let me give you a really important point to this. If you think about all of the learners today who did not complete our left to right linear pathway, that 120 credit hour pathway that we said that you have to go through all the way to get any return on your education, so that we can give you a piece of paper and then kick you out and no one ever asked you what your major is again, and then we ask you for money. That's not acceptable anymore. So if somebody has gone to an institution and they have taken a class, they should be able to have agency over that credential, that learning outcome, and own it in a verifiable and validatable way, and they can't today. So if I've taken a class in leadership education, I should be able to share that with an employer, whether or not I have completed the entire degree. And what's really compelling about this is that a blockchain anchored credential allows you to do that, right? It allows our learners to own it. It allows it to be cryptographically owned, so it's secure. It's vendor independent. It's decentralized for verification. It's tamper evident. So if someone has gone in there and tried to change the data on it or change the outcome, can't do that. And it's revocable if we want to take it away from them if they've done something. And it's independently timestamped, so it shows when and where it was issued, right? And so at the end of the day here, I think the real challenges as it relates to blockchain is the biggest one, getting our heads around what it is, and that it's not this monster that's out there that is some sort of technical problem. It's not a technical problem at all. It's an understanding of what it is and how that technology gets brought to bear for our learners to create value. The adoption piece then, of course, is an important element to this, but maybe more adoption on the employer side for them to understand what they're asking us for, rather than talking to us in majors, talk to us in credentials, right? And then I think the other problems are native higher ed problems. So one of those is isomorphic behavior. We're going to copy whoever else is around us and do the same thing because they're the elite institutions. Stop. We got to start thinking in the context, right? We got to be really smart about the learners that we're serving, because we're not all serving elite learners everywhere. And then we have to get past this idea of tradition, and we have a really compelling partnership with so-and-so and they give us revenue. They're a middleman. Those folks are middlemen, and we have to get to a place where we're giving learners agency over their credentials. And so my recommendations and challenges to everybody here are, first and foremost, center learners, right? Center learners in that experience. Second, let's center trust. And let's put the technology in place that is not a technical nightmare. It's readily available at a very low cost today. And anything you're doing today can be issued to the blockchain, whether it's a diploma or a transcript or one class or a syllabus. Any of that can be issued immediately to the blockchain and very quickly in a matter of seconds. And then let's center equity. Let's do so with real intention in a way that puts that number one in our question, because everything else after that, that's all nice to have. But the equity piece is just a really essential place. And we're at a place now where we got to be thinking about higher ed as a platform and not a process. So I'll get off my horse here a little bit, but I really want everybody to understand that blockchain's easy. You can do it right now. Anything that's great about all these other platforms, you can do in blockchain, and it addresses all the other challenges that those have. Thanks.
Thank you, Cameron. That was very enlightening. So I've learned stuff from all of the vendors. I mean, all the presenters today. Heard the word vendor earlier. And now I know a little bit more about blockchain. I appreciate your explanation there. We are running a little bit longer than anticipated. So Mary, if you're amenable to it, if you would like to address the sections that are not, briefly touch on the things that are already in the report, just sort of saying this is in the report, and rather than focusing on those slides too much. And we do want to give some Q&A time to folks. And we will also, I think, skip over the section that we said thoughts on future state, because we've already talked about that. Jim and Sue and Cameron have addressed it a little bit, so we can make sure we get to some Q&A. So Mary, I'm going to hand it off to you. And we would also have another time to talk about this on March 29th. During the annual conference, there will be additional conversation, a slightly different approach, talking a little bit more about blockchain and the future of credentials. There's not one single solution, but the focus will be a little bit more on March 29th on blockchain. So Mary, if you're amenable, I'll hand it off to you here.
Absolutely, I appreciate that. And we can go very quickly because I am curious about comments and questions from the audience. And my colleagues here on the panel have done a great job just explaining the ecosystem as it exists now and for the future. Just a comment on the future state, and I wanted to just point out that I think folks will see this in the survey as well, is that as Cameron mentioned, the technology exists to do any of this right now. It's sort of that's not the hurdle. What I'm seeing here in this response about the future of the form factor of credentials is interesting to me, because I think what it's pointing to is not a technical problem, but a learning architecture problem. How are institutions thinking about recognizing learning? And what is the form factor in which they intend to empower students with those credentials upon, the class or the graduation, or however they think about that. So when we think about things like compliant, CLRs and, comprehensive learner records, transcripts, diplomas, micro-credentials, those are form factors. What we need to be thinking about is how do they serve the student interest over a long period of time, over their lifetime? And how do we verify those claims that are often the most fraudulently claimed claims, right? Things like Mary played football at USC. So I think that those are important to think about. The future state is separating the difference between what we think is a technical problem, which really doesn't exist in terms of verification and issuance, but rather the learning architecture, how organizations are thinking about setting up a credentialing ecosystem that makes sense for students in the long term. So we could advance if you want, Wendy. That was just my high level thought on that. In terms of the survey, and Wendy and I had an early look at the survey results, it really was very clear to me that we are in a state where people have a very fundamental gap between what they think technology can do and what it can't do right now. So I think part of the issue on March 29th, and I think part of the learning that we would like ACRO to engage in, is helping folks understand the technical architecture of emerging technologies. What are the security costs and benefits? What are the challenges in terms of implementation? What are the costs to the institutions for implementing new technologies? Highland is certainly moving and pivoting our blockchain offering to a component set of APIs that can be integrated into any legacy system at any institution and instantly deployed. So, when we talk about blockchain, I try not to talk about the plumbing. I often say the first rule of blockchain is don't talk about blockchain, but we're really talking about the application here. So nobody is worried about the underpinning, way that EDX transcripts are being sent through containers on the internet. That's the plumbing. The application for using these technologies, both at Highland and other firms, already exists. And so I think it's an important learning gap that people need to address just to get more informed about what's possible. We can advance. I just, again, want to be cognizant of time. In terms of recommendations, this ability to really spend more time learning new learning architectures and what's available is really important. I think Cameron's point about centering equity and centering the modern student experience in decisions that we make is very critical, that we need to reorient how we think about how people use the credentials that we issue over their lifetime. And that's really important. How are we creating currency and value over the lifetime of the student experience with the credentials that we're offering? Lots of times the credential form factors like micro-credentials or even comprehensive learner records can become diluted if they're boutique programs within an institution, and they're not really architected to reflect the broader brand identity and experience of students. So we want to make sure that we are integrating those integrating the way we recognize learning with the technical architecture that allows it to be validated over a lifetime. And this really speaks to Cameron's point about goals. And so what is the modern student experience that we want for higher education? I think we need to recognize that mobility is increasing, that lifelong learning is increasing, and that students come to and through our institutions frequently. It's not a one and done situation. That linear process is over. And that as to serve that student experience, we need, again, to center the easy access and agency over credentials as a primary goal of registrars and institutions. I also think the point about equity is important. This ability to verify credentials will become increasingly in use. And what we don't want to do is have a set of students who are verifiable and another set of students who are not verifiable. So that has big implications on employment going forward. I think the ability to verify a claim and a credential from any issuing institution will serve to mitigate some of the issues of implicit bias that individuals face in employment and beyond. And so I think those are all really critical things for registrars and institutions to be thinking about. So again, I just went kind of quickly, but I definitely wanted to leave enough time for Q&A.
Thank you, Mary. Appreciate you. And I didn't advance the slide fast enough there for you to get that second goals. The point that you made about that the future of the credential seems to be around the form factor and those kind of things was not something that actually popped to my mind immediately, but was abundantly clear when you pointed it out there, that our data is saying it's really about how the form factor, how people are getting their information and breaking it up into chunks. I want it. So I'm going to skip the future state because our folks have already talked about that. And I'm sure we could have made this a 90-minute webinar, frankly, but on the 29th, we'll try to address them some more. And here's some resources. When our website is back up and running again, Mike will send out this link to the resources that we have here. There are many of them available to you. As I mentioned, ACE, the Department of Education, have some information on all the various resources for the digital credentials. But without further ado, please, let's hear from folks. I do want to address one. I saw that it'd be nice to see a demo of these things, the various technologies, and that's something that ACRO can look into, that we can try to get maybe the Speedy Committee members and others to record something and share it on our website where you can see these things demoed. I see Italy as well, I believe. I'm not sure what that relates to. But do we have any questions for the panelists here? If you put them in the Q&A?
Yeah, there are actually
Some of the questions.
yeah,
We've
quite a
been
few
answering
that
as
have
you've
written
done.
responses, just because I guess we were short on time. But for everyone that is curious, if you open that Q&A button up among the answered column, you should be able to see some of those answered questions there. So we have one about EDI processing, piloting blockchain technology, so on and so forth.
Well, and there is, as I mentioned, a lot of resources, and I've gone back to the resource slide here. This is just a sample of resources available for you in terms of blockchain and EDI and EDX. And the Speedy Committee at ACRO can help you, and folks at Highland and perhaps Cameron and others who are using blockchain can also guide you to some directions, because folks are using more than one solution, very much so. For a while, I don't think there's going to be any one solution is going to meet all stakeholder needs. And so there's going to probably be multiple needs for multiple formats for a while. I have a question for Cameron. Would you like to read that, Cameron, if you can see it? If not, I can read it to you.
Sure, I'd be happy to. It says,
or to panelists in general.
This is from an anonymous attendee. I heard Cameron hinting at focusing on the benefits to learners and institutions and not the features of the technology. And this is Mary echoes this, not focusing on the plumbing. Do the panelists have examples in mind of predictable but avoidable places where we get bogged down on asking questions that unintentionally take us to places of distraction versus essential understanding? Yeah, I mean, I could go on forever. I got another hour if you want to about this one. But when I talk about going from process to platform, that's where I think about the barriers here, right? So if you think about our current process for admissions, today it's a sorting process. So everything from testing to transcripts to high school diplomas to essays to all of these pieces that are in there around access to an institution are all mechanisms of sorting. Right. And the process and challenges for learners to prepare those documents are pretty substantial. Right. So and today we already see that when you stop asking for tests, the barrier to applying to an institution goes away. And we certainly see that in the data that are relevant, most recently given COVID. So if you had a platform that was perhaps blockchain oriented, where the high school diploma and all the scores and everything there was blockchain verifiable and validatable and machine readable, just like that, with the push of a button, it's already through, very similar to EDX. And you've taken away a lot of the barriers that are in place for learners to access our institutions. And then think about in the exit exercise of the university, where when you complete our process today, we give you a piece of paper and we talk about your major. And in that process of applying for a job, there are equity issues that have to do with names that aren't typical white-centric names. There are majors that we have defined because it's institutionally centric and easier for us to say, well, this is your pathway to something, but nobody ever asked you for your major again after your first job, right? And then this whole idea of verifying that document or even activating your transcript are things that just aren't doable today with the paper-based world, right? And so those become barriers to access for learners as they go out in the marketplace of world opportunity and work, right? And then post that, their ability to come back and access the institution and for us to interface with them in a way that isn't asking them for money is another barrier that's sort of there, right? And in a sort of blockchain anchored world, that gives us this infrastructure and underlying platform that automates a lot of that process, allows us to have a more relevant and time-centric understanding of where a learner is in their life pathway and how we can continue to engage them, and then gives them the agency over those credentials in a way is much more activated than is today. I hope I'm answering that question, but at the end of the day, I think the challenge is on all of us to really understand where we've put those barriers unintentionally, which is why it's a great question, in place, and how might we leverage technology to sort of take those away and create a better and more equitable pathway.
Thank you, Cameron. And we're about running out of time here. So we have embed EDI, lots of questions, technical questions. I think that even ACRO, just saying this out loud, that we probably need to do a few more of these webinars focusing on in blockchain specifically and EDX specifically and PDFs perhaps specifically, where we can do this sort of hands-on walking people through the option, because as I said earlier, people are taking more than one solution and to meet all their stakeholder needs for this time being. But I want to thank you very much, Jim, Mary, Cameron, and Sue for participating today. And there's several resources, as I shared. The Speedy Committee has lots of resources as well. Highland has resources on blockchain. I saw some questions that were being answered about specific email addresses. Our presenters are more than, up to them whether they share their email addresses with you, but individual experts are out there. And I will go back to our ACRO team and say, I think we need to do some more. The report will be out in a couple of weeks. The resources are available to you there, and there's additional resources out there. And again, on March 29th, we will take a deeper dive into more of the future and less of the research, current research, because the report will already be available to you. So that's what I have. Thank you very much again for participating today. I hope you found it useful, and hope you have a nice day.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.